Here we go. Well, hello again. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world. And thank you for joining me, Debbie Archer and Jonathan Hunsley. Quick intro to Jonathan. Other way around, please, Chris, on the names. Quick intro to Jonathan. He is a director at System Knowledge Development, KD. He is an author, a trainer, a podcaster, business architect, business analyst, working across industries. And I'm absolutely sure you're going to have a really good time listening to his presentation today. So I'm going to pass straight on over to you, Jonathan, to share your presentation with us.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you very much. I just want to start by saying I'm absolutely ecstatic. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for joining today. I really do hope you get some key takeaways from today's presentation and that you learn lots about these disciplines of service design and lean thinking. I'm going to be putting a lens on these disciplines, and I'm going to be looking at how they relate to the domain of business analysis, which is one of my specialties. But I'm going to start with a quick introduction to myself. So let's see if the slides work. So fingers crossed they work. So first of all, I am all of the things that Debbie mentioned. The podcast that we produce is called the BA Brew. We're towards the end of our third season now. We're busy planning the end of the third season, but they're short, informal podcasts that look at subjects that are of interest to change professionals, to business analysts, business architects, anyone in the change profession. So please do check that out. You can find it on the usual streaming services. Do take a look. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm also a dad, and this is my son Bertie, and this is us climbing in the hills in Scotland this summer. And you're going to hear a little bit more about Bertie in the rest of the presentation, but I just wanted to give a quick intro to him as well. Let's move on then. So the three thinking approaches that we're going to be looking at today. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of them right at the start, and then we're going to dive into those thinking approaches in more detail. What I would like to add is that these thinking approaches come with an associated toolkit that we're not going to have time to cover the full extent of that toolkit this afternoon. But what I would like to do is give you an introduction to some of the tools that you can use to help you with applying these thinking approaches. And we'll do that in today's presentation. So let's have a look then at service thinking. We're also going to be looking at the relationship to the domain that I specialize in, which is business analysis. So let's have a look at service thinking. So service thinking comes from the academic discipline of service science, engineering, and management. So that's quite a mouthful, but it's often abbreviated to service science or service thinking. And the key thing to remember about service thinking is that the provider of a good or a service can only ever offer value. So they offer value to a recipient. And what the service science and service thinking does is it's a very humble approach. And because it's focused on the offer of value, rather than the assumption that we can deliver value, which is a fallacy in the service thinking paradigm. We're constantly thinking, well, who's the beneficiary or the audience of a service, or the victim of a service, and what do they think about the service offer that we've made? Can we work with them? Can we collaborate with them? Can we co-create value with them to understand how they might get better uses, better outcomes from the use of the product or the service? So that's my brief intro. We're going to go back into service thinking in a short while, but we're also going to look at just briefly at design thinking. So design thinking, lots of noise about design thinking in recent years, which you may have come across. For me, it's a very pragmatic discipline. We're looking here at trying to solve for issues, problems in our organizations and in society. So we're very keen, if we're putting a design thinking lens on, to think through what's the real problem, what's the real opportunity, to use divergent thinking, so thinking expansively about what might be the causes of a problem, what's the real root cause. And then convergent thinking, which is homing in on possible definitions of a problem and solution, and making sure we solve for the right problems in our organization or wherever we're applying design thinking. And then from the solution context, again, we're looking at divergent thinking, all of the possible range of solutions. And then convergent thinking, we're going to test, prototype, and make sure that solutions work and do solve for the original problems that we set out to achieve. We are looking at an innovation mindset as well within design thinking, and robust and continuous challenging of assumptions. So lots of these thinking approaches overlap with business analysis, because for me, business analysis is all about thinking about business outcomes. The third thinking approach that we're going to cover today, and I will admit it's my favorite of the three thinking approaches that we're covering, and is lean thinking. And lean's got a rich history. We'll go through some of that today, but it's relentlessly focused on quality, reduction of waste, what's the customer wants, and how can we optimize and make as efficient as possible the outcomes for the customer. So we're going to cover lean thinking in slightly more detail, but that's the brief introduction to the three thinking approaches. So what we're now going to do is we're going to go into each of those thinking approaches in slightly more detail, and then we'll finish off today by looking at, well, how do those thinking approaches relate to the discipline of business analysis? So let's look again at service thinking. So we're studying the nature of service, and what this means is that we're thinking about before an interaction with an organization, during an interaction. So let's imagine that you're using a music streaming service, for example. So it's before you download and use a music streaming service. It's the service during the use of that music streaming service, and it's how that music streaming service makes you feel. It's how you relate and interact with the music. And it also extends to when you've deleted the app and maybe you've switched over to a different music streaming service. So it's looking at value co-creation. How can an organization, through its products or services, work with customers, recipients of the products or services, to obtain value for both the organization and the customer? But the focus is really on the customer. We're trying to work out, well, what is it that the customer wants and how can we satisfy their stated or implied needs. It looks at how in an ecosystem, so we take the music streaming service, so we've got lots of players in that ecosystem, such as the music, the musicians, the producers, the record labels, the technology companies. How are they all interacting together in order to make sure that when you listen to the music or the podcast, for example, that you're getting a satisfying experience? So it's looking at how do the entities in an ecosystem interact with each other. It's interdisciplinary, so it fits with and uses other academic disciplines in order to look at how do we engender a culture of service improvement and ensuring that the interactions, the flow between the entities is optimized. So that's my slightly deeper introduction into service thinking and service science. And I'm just going to introduce the business analysis service framework as well, because one of the things we can do as change professionals is define our value offer to our customers. And the business analysis service framework defines the value offer of the business analyst for the customers of the business analysis service. It was developed by Deborah Paul and published in 2018. What this is a starting point for saying, well, these are the services that a business analyst offers internally within an organization. So you can see 6 core services, including the investigation of problems and opportunities, the situation investigation. And next to that, you can see the value proposition for that service. So we can start to see, well, these are the expected outcomes that you would get if you were to engage in that particular service offer. You can see the other services there: feasibility assessment and business case development, key to the successful delivery of change, that we understand the rationale for the change and that we've explored the options and the feasibility of those. Business process improvement, a very well trodden path in terms of use of business analysis services. We're looking for high quality, efficient processes that are documented, they're well formed. Requirements definition is there as well, high quality requirements. We've got a very clear statement of the wants and the needs of the business that we're going to align our solutions to. Some business analysts get involved in user or business acceptance testing. And then there's the business change deployment service, which can also be used. So this is a lens that we'll come back to, but this is my understanding of what is business analysis. If you weren't sure, weren't aware of what is business analysis, this is a good definition for what is business analysis. And we'll come back to this a little later on. So let's go back to service thinking and service science. What is a service? Well, it's the application of a competence or competencies for the benefit of another. And I'm going to introduce you to my barber. And this is my barber, Dan. He works at the Fade Lab in the UK in the county of Northamptonshire. And this is my barber, Dan, a few months ago cutting my hair. And so he's applying his competence for the benefit of another, and the benefit of the other is me. I'm getting the benefit of the haircut, him applying his tools, skills, and knowledge in the context of a barbershop. And you can also see Bertie, my son. So he's getting his hair washed. He's having a great time and very relaxed, as you can see. But you can see that tools, skills, and knowledge are being applied within a particular context in order to offer a service to another person. Now, the context in which you offer your services is going to be different to a barbershop unless you're a part-time barber or hairdresser. And so you have to think about the dynamics of the situation for the services that you're looking at. And one of the things that you can do to help you understand the dynamics of the situation is to look at the ecosystem in which the service is offered. So an ecosystem is a community of interacting entities. And for a barbershop, you can see quite a few different providers in the ecosystem. So you can see the suppliers of, for example, the clippers and the hair products, the competitors, the landlord. My barber rents his particular premises. Payment providers, so payment at the end of the haircut. That's a step in the customer journey, and is something that can impact your customer experience. The utility providers, the electricity, the gas, the water suppliers, and obviously the customers part of this ecosystem as well. The barbershop only works if it's got customers. So this is at one level, but if we look further, you'll see that there's loads of other players in the ecosystem also. The music streaming services, the broadband providers, insurance, and others. And so when we're thinking about the service offer relative to our environment, we've got to understand the ecosystem, and we've got to try and orchestrate the service offer so they're optimal within the nature of the environment in which we're operating. And service thinking is really useful for this. It's encouraging us to think holistically and to think broadly and expansively about the business and the entities that we're interacting with. And for us as change professionals, it means that we don't forget anyone. If we're on a change journey, we've thought about the context, and we're not going to change something without fully thinking through what might be the impact and thinking about who are the stakeholders of the particular change. So let's just continue our journey into service thinking. Well, one of the things that we'll suggest is that you start with the customer. And one of the tools that you can use to help you to start with a customer is a persona. And you can see some personas here for my son and for myself relative to this barbershop. So you can see a tagline for us. You can see some narrative in terms of our ages. You can see a little bit about our characters. And you can also see some of our motivations and goals in the use of the service. So what are my motivations, goals? Time's short. I'm very busy, but I'm happy to pay a little bit more for a good service, for a good haircut. My son, however, he's not paying, and I have tried to convince him that he should be paying for his haircuts, but he's not having any of it. What he's concerned with is looking good while he plays football. And one of the things that Bertie quite likes is accessing the free Wi-Fi and also accessing the drinks fridge. And he quite often he has a Dr. Pepper when he goes to get his haircut, and that's one of the value offers that the barbershop makes relative to Bertie. And you can see there that in this ecosystem, in this particular barbershop, there's a little bit of thinking about what it is that the customer wants and needs. And we're going to dive into that in a little bit more detail. But persona is a really useful technique if you're trying to pick up and apply a service mindset to help you to think through the customer's perspective. The value proposition is really key as well. So value propositions are interesting. I look at these all the time, but one of the ways I'm going to help to explain what is a value proposition is the offer of value to customers, and this is the fridge in the barbershop that we use, and you can see different value offers for different types of customers, different personas. So let's imagine the barbershop has a customer, a young family, maybe take a family with young children. They're taking young children to get their hair cut. You can see these kind of fruit juices and the sugar-free drinks as well for that type of customer. But then you've got water bottles, and this is an interesting value proposition, because you could argue, well, that's a negative. The barbershop should be not providing bottled water because of the impact on the environment, which I think is a very valid criticism of the barbershop. But you can see there's alcoholic drinks on offer, and maybe that's for the local walking crowd. Maybe I drive to the barbershop, so I don't have a beer when I go to the barbershop, but maybe there are certain customers that do enjoy a beer when they come to the barbershop, and you can start to see that the capability that's there in terms of refrigeration is being reused by this organization to offer slightly different tailored services, value offers, relative to its customers. And it would very quickly be able to see whether or not those customers were finding the value offer worthwhile, as to whether or not the drinks are being taken out of the fridge. What's the popularity of the respective drinks in there? So it's starting with the customer, thinking about your value proposition, really key from a service thinking, service science perspective. The other thing I wanted to show you, and there's lots of techniques I'd love to cover more with you today, but we don't unfortunately have time, is this. And this comes from Osterwalder and Pina, and it's the value proposition canvas. And what it does is it looks at the value offer of the organization, the value map on the left-hand side, versus the customer profiles. And the customer profiles can be aligned to your personas. What we're looking at is, what are the gains that customers seeking to achieve? What pains are they looking to avoid? And what jobs are they seeking as outcomes? And how well does that fit with our value proposition, our value offer, in terms of gain creators and pain relievers and products and services? So let's have a look at that in more detail. You can see some descriptions on there, the stated pains and gains, and the functional, social, and emotional jobs of the customer that they'll be thinking about or seeking as outcomes as a result of the engagement with the product or service. And then we're looking again on the left-hand side at our relative products and services relative to the offer or the expectations of the customer. So let's look at an example. So you can see a value offer there for a barbershop. You can see complimentary drinks, the high quality service, the trained barbers, parking and Wi-Fi, and the ability to book in advance. Remember, I said I'm time poor. I don't like to wait around. And then the core products and services, the haircuts, the beard trims. And then what you can do is you can think, well, for a persona, for a particular customer, what's that person's gains and pains? What are they seeking to achieve? And I'm looking to relax, get a haircut. That's the main job. Going to the barbers. But one of my pains going to other barbershops is parking and Wi-Fi and waiting as well. I'm not a big fan of waiting. The gains, a decent haircut and on hopefully an enjoyable experience. But then let's contrast that to my son. He's got a different set of goals. He's looking for his Dr. Pepper, and he wants to look good playing football. He wants some time away from his younger sister as well, and he wants to get a haircut. His pains, he doesn't want to wait, and he certainly has a distaste for poor quality Wi-Fi. But these tools and techniques are helping us put ourselves in the mind or the shoes of the customer, and entirely aligned with this service thinking approach. So what I wanted to do is give you a brief introduction. So hopefully that's useful for you. There are lots of other tools that you can use aligned to service thinking, but we unfortunately don't have time for those today. So what we're going to do is move on to design thinking, which is up next. And I'm going to start with a definition of design thinking, it comes from Tim Brown, and he's the executive chair of IDEO, and these are a consultancy that work very closely with Stanford University. And what you can see there, that design thinking is human-centered, and what it's looking to do is to draw on the designer's toolkit, to integrate the needs of people, the possibilities of technology, and the requirements for business success. So this is business outcome focused, but also customer people centric. So lots of overlaps with service thinking and service science, which I'm hopeful that you can start to see in this definition. One of the techniques that you can use in design thinking is the British Design Council's double diamond, and I'm bombarding you with tools and theory, and hopefully this is of interest to you. So what we do in design thinking, we start with a problem and opportunity, and we go through divergent thinking initially. This is thinking broadly and expansively about the problem space, testing our assumptions and making sure that we're clear exactly what are the possible causes of the issue, and making sure that we've explored all of the possible assumptions around that. What we then do is we frame the scope, we define the problem. We can't solve all of the problems, but we need a definition of the problem, so we're very clear what it is that we're solving for before we think about the solution space. And that's really key in a design thinking process. This iterates whilst the arrows are linear. We can iterate through these, so we can frame the scope and we can go back in to gather insights if we deem that there's a need to. But the outcome of the problem space is that we've got a problem definition. Then what we do is we move into divergent thinking in this develop phase. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at and think broadly and expansively about all of the possible solutions for a problem. And then we're going to converge and think about prototypes and testing our assumptions, testing whether or not our potential solutions work and they actually solve the problem that we're there to resolve. And what it does is it aims towards a solution that works on a pragmatic, practical basis. And for me, this is really useful for all of us as change professionals, irrespective of the individual discipline, because what it is encouraging is thinking, challenge, and building practical solutions for identified problems and opportunities. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly show you a few techniques that are aligned to the design thinking toolkit. And one of them is this, and it's the empathy map. And what this does is it helps us again to put ourselves in the shoes of a persona, and it walks us through what is it that for that individual persona, what are they saying, doing, thinking, and feeling? And let's have a look at some examples. So I'm using the barbershop extensively here. So some things that customers might say: how have you been? Can I have a different haircut today? One of the things that I say frequently to my particular barber is that the career advice he gives me is absolutely terrible. He gives me the worst career advice I've ever heard, and I have lots of fun telling him that, and he thinks it's funny as well and tries to give me even worse career advice the next time I see him. The other things that the customer might do, so they might make their next booking. If they don't, that's feedback. They might recommend you to friends. They might leave a tip. And these are kind of things that are a bit more practical. And you can see these things on the left-hand side, or hear the things on the left-hand side. The thinks and feels elements are a little bit more complex, because you've got to put yourself in their shoes, and you have to either ask questions or you have to sit and think, well, what is it that they might be thinking? And the customer might be thinking about time. They might be thinking about, should I have a drink? Should I have one of those beers maybe, or maybe not? Have I got an appointment to get to after the haircut, for example? Then what is it that they're feeling? And if we're going to build customer-centric, human-centered solutions, we've got to tap into the emotional state of the customer and our employees, but try and think about, well, what are the feelings that we want to engender as a result of people interacting with us in terms of our products and our services. And this as a tool helps you, relative to a persona, to have these discussions with your colleagues about, well, what are the personas, and what is it that we're achieving relative to them, and to help you to empathize with those personas as a basis for building products, services that work for them. So that's an empathy map. And then the other tool I wanted to show you, that's just a quick brief introduction to, is assumption reversal. And this one's a lot of fun, because this is used in in the divergent thinking space, and it can be used as a creativity technique. So we're trying to think, well, let's list our assumptions and think about how we might reverse them in order to see if we can come up with more creative solutions than we would otherwise have come up with. And so let me show you an example. And this is a real example. It is in the barbershop. I know that I'm using the barbershop a lot, but one of the original assumptions in a barbershop might be that the barber selects the music. And what my barber does is he's reversed that assumption. And what he does is he gives my son's 9 years old. He gives my son his phone, and my son selects the music via a music streaming service to play a quite loud volume in the barbershop to all of the other customers. And he does this as a matter of course. It's my son sits in the chair and he's not getting a haircut. He's a DJ for the next half an hour, and he plays his favorite tunes, some of which are really loud and quite kind of dancy, and others that he plays are quite kind of relaxed. It depends what mood he's in. But instead of being sat there as a customer listening to music that the barber selected, suddenly my son's the DJ, and the other barbers join in and they cheer him on when he plays a song that they like. And they also take the mick out of him if he plays a song that they don't like. And so it becomes part of the experience. And I'm very confident, until I mentioned it to him, that my barber had not heard of design thinking until I'd mentioned it. But what he's done is he's thought in depth about what is the customer experience and how can I uplift that customer experience. We'll come on to a little bit more of what my barber's thoughts are towards the end of the presentation. So that's my brief intro to design thinking. It's a fascinating subject, and I would advocate that you find out more if it's of interest to you. There's lots of different tools on there. I am going to cover my favorite thinking approach though, which is lean thinking. And lean thinking originates from Toyota, which is the company that's set up and is running long before Toyota, the motor manufacturer that you've heard of today. And one of the things that Toyota do is they've got a loom factory, so a factory that produces carpet, rugs, weaves, for example. And one of the things they do in the Toyota loom factory is when they notice that a thread has broken, for example, on a rug, they stop production. They stop production because what they want to do is avoid producing a rug that has a defect. And so it makes sense to them to stop production, fix the thread, and then to continue production so that they have an output that is of a high quality and is free of defects. And this story around the production line workers stopping production, people coming to their aid and to help them to fix the issue, to optimize flow across the production line, and to produce outcomes without defect. I think it's really key for you understanding the basis of, well, what is lean and what are the elements that might contribute towards lean thinking. There's various versions of this. This is a version. You may have come across Toyota Production Systems. Sometimes this is called the House of Lean. But I like to call this the Thinking People System. And you can see the two pillars there of lean, and they are respect for people. So you have to respect individuals, the workers, the managers in an organization. You have to create a culture where there is psychological safety, where people can air their concerns, air problems, air their ideas, and be listened to. The other big pillar that you'll see is continuous improvement. So relentless focus on continuous improvement. Challenge, how can we improve things for the better? Kaizen is a Japanese word that doesn't easily translate into English, but roughly translates into change for the best. And so we're not continuously improving for the sake of it, but we're trying to change for the better, and we're trying to improve for the better, aligned with strategy, or aligned with the goals of the organization of society. And then Gemba is an interesting concept. It literally means go and see. So you go and see with your own eyes, and this means that we're not far removed from the problems. We've got an understanding because we've seen them with our own eyes, and I think this is really useful for us all as change professionals. Fits in with the other thinking approaches for me, that we're going to go and explore the problems and opportunities and really understand the recipients of the services, the products that we're offering, by going and seeing and going and speaking to people. The thinking principles, and these come from Womack and Jones, they are specify value, so understand value, think back to service thinking and the value proposition, if you like. Think back to understanding the problem and opportunity in design thinking. So we've really got to understand what is value and how we might offer value and improve it. Identify the value stream, and this is the flow of activities between your suppliers. And if we go back to the service thinking paradigm, you think about the ecosystem, the value stream from the provider of the hair products through to the wholesaler, through to the barbershop, through to the use of those hair products by the barber with the customer. Thinking about the value stream there. What is that? Is that optimized? Is it suboptimal? Can we improve it? Because what we're looking to do is remove waste, optimize flow, enhance pull. So the pull element is the customer pulls the work from the organization, pulls the products, pulls the service. We don't have a large inventory of stock or unfinished goods and materials in our warehouses, for example. And then perfection. We're constantly and forever seeking to improve. We're aiming towards what's known as true north in terms of continuous improvement. I don't have time to show you lots of different tools in the lean thinking approach, but I would like to show you this one, and it's a SIPOC. So SIPOC's a great way of thinking about processes. It allows us to think through the value stream. So we're thinking about the process. Is it optimal? Is there standards that are appropriate? Have we got the right people being responsible and accountable for a process? Really key questions to consider. We're thinking back into the inputs and the suppliers of the inputs. So let's imagine the barber's using, I don't know, a form of wax or gel. Now, if the supplier of that particular materials, that pot of wax or gel, if that supplier is using inferior quality materials to produce their wax or their gel, it's no kind of shouldn't be a surprise if the output is a customer that's got maybe an itchy head because there's some sort of rash on their head, or the hair product isn't performing as expected, or has got a funny smell, or for some other kind of horrid kind of outcome. Because what we're trying to do using a SIPOC is think about outcomes, and think about outcomes for the customer. And if we think back to the previous thinking approaches, the empathy map, the persona, the value proposition canvas, and the value profiles, we can start to see how these thinking approaches are all outcome centric, and they're thinking about, well, how can we improve things for both the customer and obviously for the business or the organization that we work for as well. So SIPOC, really useful technique. I would advocate that you learn more about SIPOC after today if you're interested in a process lens. But what we'll do is we're going to finish with a continuous improvement life cycle, and this is the Schuhart-Deming life cycle, and it's the variant that has plan, do, and then study. And study is really key in this life cycle, because we're going to study what are the causes of problems, what are the causes of success, what's led to the outcomes that we've got with our customers in our organizations. And then the difficult part of a continuous improvement life cycle is to act on the continuous improvement initiatives and efforts. And I'm going to leave with a quote on lean thinking with a quote from Deming, who you may have come across, and his suggestion is that we use these thinking approaches to improve constantly and forever the production of service, to improve quality and productivity. So it's a very humble approach. It's looking for ideas, looking for a TPS, the thinking people system, people constantly thinking about how can we improve flow, quality, waste reduction, and whatnot. So that's my brief introduction to lean thinking. What we're going to do now is see if we can connect the dots and look at how these relate to each other. So the three thinking approaches are service, design, and lean thinking. And the question is, well, how do they relate to business change, business analysis? And my very biased view is that they do relate to each other. We've got lots of different tools that can be used that underpin these thinking approaches, some of which I've introduced to you today. But design thinking, thinking about that problem space, the solution space. Service thinking, constantly thinking about value co-creation, products and services that work. And I think that links through to design thinking. Lean thinking, thinking about improvement, thinking about customer outcomes. These really do interrelate with each other. And for me, all of the thinking approaches are outcome centric and are entirely focused on continuous improvement of the things that we do in our respective organizations. And I hope that these are useful for you going forward, at least these introductions. I do want to just show you quickly as well how they relate to the service framework for business analysis. And my view is that in the offer of change services, that all of us in whatever our offer is, we need to be applying these thinking approaches. We need to be thinking about the customers and the outcomes for them and how we can make things better for our respective organizations. No presentation's complete without a quote from Steve Jobs. And so what I thought I'd do was leave with a quote of Steve Jobs, or almost leave with a quote from him. And one of his mantras, he talks about trying to focus to get your thinking clean. So focus and simplicity, they work. They take a lot of time, but once you've got there, if you've got your thinking clean, you can move mountains. I think that's quite a powerful message, given that we're looking at thinking approaches today. But I can't leave on a quote from Steve Jobs. What I wanted to do is give you a quote instead from my barber. His name's Dan Silver. He works at the Fade Lab. And I asked him, what would he want to say to an audience such as yourselves? Following today's presentation, I went to get my haircut at the weekend, and he said to me that, you know, the message that I'd say would be really key would be that you've got to think. You've got to look at, if you're in a competitive organization, what your competitors are doing and do it better. And for him, he'd argue that customer service is his competitive advantage. I just thought I'd leave with a short quote from Dan. I just want to thank you all. If you like what you see, please do listen in onto that BA Brew podcast. It'd be great to have you as listeners. Please do connect in with us on LinkedIn and via the other channels. But I just want to say a massive thank you. If you'd like to connect in with me on LinkedIn, my details are on the screen. And I'm hopeful that Debbie's there so that we could, if there are any questions, we could possibly have a look at some questions.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for that. That was so brilliant. Honestly, absolutely enthralling. Great to meet Bertie, and both of you, fantastic haircuts. So a big shout out to Dan also. What a really effective way of putting this together. Loved it. So
my son wants payment as well. He's told me he wants payment of at least £10 for me using him in a presentation. So that's going to cost me later.
Some Dr. Pepper, I think.
Yes.
Favorite, some Dr. Pepper. So people are a little bit shy putting into comments, but we've got some questions coming through here, so it's fine. So how do the thinking approaches relate in an agile context?
Oh, that's a really good question. So thanks for that, Debbie. So the Agile Manifesto would be my kind of starting point for thinking about the Agile context. So customer collaboration, working software, responding to change over following a plan, all of these kind of elements, for me, they link into the Agile mindset and that Agile Manifesto, and so are very complementary to the Agile mindset. And one of the ways that thinking approaches link, so lean plus agile obviously go together very well because it's my favorite thinking approach, but we should be thinking about customer collaboration. The value co-creation element of service thinking, again, that's about co-creation with your customer to make sure that things work. And then lots of organizations are using design thinking prior to moving into agile software development as a means of exploring problems, opportunities, and making sure that they've got fully rounded and holistic thinking about the things, the solutions they're looking to develop against. So very neat and aligned, certainly in my worldview. There are other views on it, but they're very complementary, the agile thinking mindset.
So you talked a lot about different personas and the different things that customers were looking for. As a BA, how do you use any of these techniques to help you prioritize, perhaps?
That's a tough question. So if you've got lots of personas and lots of possible product services you could be enhancing for those customers or offering to them, it's not an easy question to answer, but you've got to think, well, what is your business strategy? What are the priorities for the business? And then which customer segments do you want to look at? And one of the things that the lean thinking toolkit does is it looks at the voice of the customer. And you can use that to help you to think through where are the pain points for the customers, which ones might you want to enhance, reduce friction points and whatnot. But it really does depend on the context in which you're operating and what are the strategic priorities of the organization. And the thinking approaches are going to help you to identify opportunities and ways to move forward. They aren't designed to give you a strategic prioritization checklist. So there are techniques for that, but then I wouldn't say they're embedded in these thinking approaches. If that answers your question, Debbie, so a good question. Thank you.
Great. And how much does culture affect actually using these approaches in an organization?
Massively. It is a huge correlation to culture. So if we're in a hierarchical organization whereby people do as they're told and don't question things, it's going to be really difficult to apply these thinking approaches. So particularly lean thinking, I mentioned challenge and Gemba, go and see. So if we're in a hierarchical organization and the culture is one whereby senior leaders are removed from the detail of the work, it can be really challenging to apply that type of thinking approach. And the other thing that I'm just going to add is feedback, continuous feedback and continuous improvement. The words that are banded around, and often organizations' cultures impede the use of these thinking approaches. So it is really useful to think through, what is my organizational culture? Is it respectful of people? Is continuous improvement a buzzword, or is it one that's actually meant and followed through? And I mentioned in the continuous improvement life cycle that ACT is one of the most difficult parts. And acting on the feedback to deliver the improvements really quite difficult. It takes a lot of rigor and accountability to make sure that that happens. So culture is a huge challenge in terms of using these thinking approaches.
So one of the things which is a little bit close to our heart in A4Q at the moment is design thinking. As you know, we have a certification in that. Just thinking about that design thinking as an approach, is it just the domain of the BA, or has it got a broader audience?
No, it's not just the domain of the business analyst. It's a collaborative approach for any change professional to pick up and use that toolkit and the techniques to help to develop practical solutions that work. And there's quite an expansive toolkit underneath design thinking, as you know, Debbie. And it's not just the domain of the business analyst. It's product owners, it's developers, solution architects, enterprise architects, testers can all be involved in that design thinking process because it's collaborative.
Mm-hmm. So I've obviously been reading around this subject a little bit because of the latest release, and I've seen it perhaps pitched as a bit of a silver bullet. What would you say the main challenges would be with implementing design thinking with an organization would be? We've talked a little bit about culture.
Yeah.
What else would you highlight?
So I'd say that no such thing as a silver bullet. No silver bullet solutions exist for any kind of the problems in terms of delivering change or strategic goals and outcomes. Culture is the key thing, Debbie, in terms of the culture has to be open and supportive of that challenge of assumptions, challenge of ideas, be willing to fail. So some of the initial prototypes you might come up with in design thinking, certainly in that solution space, they might fail. And that needs to be seen as a positive learning experience as opposed to something that's career limiting for those individuals that have failed. The British engineer Dyson, I think, went through something like 5,000 iterations of his the Hoover, the original vacuum cleaner, before he gets it right. And that's that willingness to fail and to learn from the failures is a really key barrier to overcoming the culture for design thinking. I'm sure there are others, but that's the one that springs to mind at this point, Debbie.
And is it something you can learn? Can I learn to be a design thinker?
You certainly can. Yeah, you can pick up and learn these tools and techniques, and you don't need permission to learn about them either. So yes, I believe you can learn it. You can certainly learn the process, you can learn the tools and techniques. I do think it requires practice though. So you have to pick up and apply these tools in practice to master the design thinking mindset. But there's absolutely no permission required to go off and do that.
And And just a little hint, perhaps, are there some organisations where some of the thinking approaches are being used? I know you've mentioned a couple in the context of lean, but are there some other examples that you think might be worth sharing?
So I'll share a personal one. So I'm a user of a sound system called Sonos. And for me, what they do is they think about the customer experience in terms of listening to music in your home. They're looking at the ecosystem in terms of their connectivity to smart speakers technology, Google, Amazon Alexa and whatnot. They've also got the streaming services, and I can see an ecosystem. But one of the things, as a customer of Sonos, when I contact them, they seem to deal with my problems fairly quickly. So there seems to be optimal flow and quality built in. But I am also going to share, so I'm a director of Assist Knowledge Development. We use these thinking approaches to run our business. So, and I know that that's somewhat biased, but we do use these thinking approaches to think about and analyze how we can improve our own products and services that we offer into the marketplace. So they're my two examples. There are lots of others, I'm sure, but those are the two that I'll share for now.
Thank you for that. And what a lovely way to end this session. We've come to our time out. A huge thank you, Jonathan, for being here today, and a huge thank you to everybody who's listened. If you do have any questions for Jonathan, then come and meet some of us. I know Jonathan can't be there later at the Oktoberfest, but quite a few of us will be, and we can always then relay the questions over to Jonathan, and he can get back to you on that. Again, thank you, and we'll certainly see people later. And thanks, Jonathan. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
This 27th of October, we wait for you to celebrate Oktoberfest in our gather town. For sure, it will be a very entertaining event with live music, with A4Q staff, and of course, all of you. Don't miss our A4Q Oktoberfest. It will be very fun. Prost!